listening to Overwatch League Daily, your daily source for Overwatch League news, scores, and more. Here's your host, KickedTripod.
Hey, good morning, Overwatch League fans, and welcome to the final day of Stage 2. We're just shy of the halfway point of the Overwatch League inaugural season. So before we get started and discuss the Stage 2 playoffs, here's your scoreboard brought to you by patreon.com/OWL Daily Show. The London Spitfire defeated the Dallas Fuel 3-1. The New York Excelsior swept the LA Valiant 4-0. Don't you love those short recaps? And the LA Gladiators fell at the hand of the Boston Uprisings 3-2. The fact that they lost and that they didn't sweep Boston eliminates the Gladiators from the Stage 2 playoffs. So your Stage 2 playoff bracket will be the Philadelphia Fusion versus the London Spitfire, and the winner of that match will go up against NYXL. Today I'm going to take a look at the LA Gladiators versus Boston Uprising match and give a quick preview of the Stage 2 playoffs. So let's talk about the Gladiators versus the Boston Uprising. The Uprising struggled in the first half of the stage. It's pretty simple, but they completed the stage at honestly a pretty respectable 6-4. However, I need to point something out, and that's that 5 out of 6 of Boston's Stage 2 wins come against the bottom 5 teams of Stage 2. The Shock, Valiant, Fuel, Dragons, and Mayhem. I'm not ready to say that Boston is back, even though they've certainly looked better these past few weeks. On the flip side, you have the Gladiators, who were a really great Cinderella story and a testament to the importance of stages in Overwatch League. While the Gladiators find themselves in 8th place at 10-10 for the entire season so far, they were 1 game away and 3 maps away from getting their shot at a $125,000 prize pool, which is pretty amazing for the team and should be a testament to why I agree with Bren on the show last week that Fissure should be a very strong consideration for stage MVP. Because if you look at how he affected the Gladiators, it's pretty night and day. About how they're doing now versus how they were doing before. But I think the saddest part about the Gladiators was the way they seemed to stall out at the end of Stage 2. Even so, in Stage 2, the Gladiators defeated the Spitfire, Valiant, and Outlaws in this stage. To contrast this, before Fissure was added to their roster, the Gladiators were swept by the Outlaws and lost to the Valiant in Stage 1. But let's talk about the match for a little bit. One thing that's really impressive is that the Boston Uprising have yet to lose on Volskaya Industries. And they run the same composition every time. They run a full dive, so Diva, Winston, Tracer, Mercy, and Zenyatta, with Dream Casper on the Widowmaker. And in all honesty, this was the map that the Gladiators needed to prepare for the most. And I'm not totally convinced they did. At least they didn't look it. Or kind of counter theory is that they over-prepared for this map. And I'll illustrate why in a second. The Gladiators tried to use a single support composition on point B defense. Surefour was on Widowmaker for point A. He switched to Sombra for point B, so you can kind of get away with a single support when you have a Sombra. He ran up an EMP, and then after kind of a really catastrophic defensive hold, he switches to McCree, and then switches back to Sombra. They realized they needed the Sombra, or they decided that they didn't want Shaz to get off the Genji that he was on, because he was keeping Dreamcasper in check as well as he could, and was coming up on his Dragon Blade. There's one problem on that map for the Gladiators that they didn't account for. They used Sombra and Winston to keep Striker at arm's length, or they tried to. They used Shaz to try to keep Dream Casper in check. And then you trust that Fissure, while Gamzu is a really great Winston, I don't think he's quite ready to be in the same conversation as Fissure and Gesture at this time. But I do think he definitely has the potential to be there. But someone we don't talk a lot is Nako. We saw Nako on a lot of crucial picks on Volskaya. And Nako, he's not the most impressive Zenyatta when it comes to that style of play. He's not Sleepy. He's not Jonak. He's a bit more reserved in the way that he plays his Zenyatta. So we saw him get a lot of crucial picks, but there was actually one point where he negated Surefour's EMP with his Transcendence on the last point, which honestly probably won them that match. The Uprising forced the Gladiators into too many one-on-one situations. They left members diving with Fissure pretty weak. You can't focus Dream Casper and Striker on a one-on-one type of assignment and expect the follow-up on Fissure and Bishu's dives. And that's kind of where we saw things. We saw the cracks, where Boston saw the cracks and really capitalized. Nico also saved the day on defense after the Gladiators were up to, I don't have the exact number, but it appeared to be about 95%. Nico is seen, he's off the point. He chunks Fissure down to about 25% health and does the same to Bishu just in time for Dream Casper to Dragon Blade. And a lot of people are giving the credit to Dream Casper there, but if you go back and watch, you can barely even see Neko off to the side, but you'll see him hit two crucial right clicks on Gamsu and on Bishu and on Fissure that allows Dream Casper to finish those up. As an added bonus, he finishes Surefour and Shaz on his own. And on Volskaya, Nico racks up 25 assists, 25 eliminations, and only 4 deaths while doing over 7,000 damage, which I don't have the ability to go back and look at every single map, but I would say is probably one of his most dominant maps that we have seen. So while I think there's a lot to discuss about what made the Uprising successful on Volskaya, you've got Gamsu going toe-to-toe with Fissure, shutting down Surefour, and then, of course, Striker outplaying Asher. I feel like we don't get to discuss Nako enough because he's not that exciting of a Zenyatta when you compare him to, again, Sleepy or Jonak. And here's the thing. That map was a must-win for the Gladiators, and you could tell that the pressure got to them a bit. Boston prioritized Fissure in at least 2 ways. The first is that Boston played pretty spread out. We saw them play a little bit more spread out than they have in the past, which you can do because you're running Zenyatta and Mercy. You'll also see Nako default his orb to Fissure, which is what you do as a Zenyatta, but Boston is a team that reacts so quickly and so aggressively that Fissure was almost always outnumbered or outdamaged, which leads me to my second point, is that they forced Fissure to take fights that he didn't want to take or couldn't win. Boston's dive, again, really aggressive, reacts very quickly. They can afford the extra space, especially on Volskaya, which is a map where there's a lot of different layers and platforms, and especially with health packs, it's not a bad way to set up for a team like Boston. So in the end, the map that mattered, Boston was better prepared though I don't doubt there was some anxiety on the side of the Gladiators that had something to do with it. So, at the end of stage 2, I'm left a bit confused by these two teams. While the Gladiators have shown that they are capable of beating the best teams, they definitely seem to struggle toward the end of stage 2. Throughout stage 2, we saw teams try to focus on killing Fissure. And this was something really important that I've picked up on. In stage 2, Fissure is like, well, hey, the Gladiators have Fissure now. Kill Fissure and you win. Look at the LA Valiant and look at the Seoul Dynasty matches. These are two great contrasting examples. The Dynasty defeated the Gladiators, I believe 3-1, while the Valiant were swept by the Gladiators. However, Fissure died twice as much against the Valiant than he did against the Dynasty. The Dynasty played conservatively around Fissure and were ultimately successful. So this is probably a lesson for other teams that it's not just about killing Fissure that gets you the win. It's how you deal with Fissure after his dive. After he makes his dive, how do you deal with him and make sure that you don't let him dictate the positioning? Now on to the Uprising. The Uprising are basically the same story, but in reverse. They were one match away from the stage 1 playoffs, and then they trend down pretty hard at the bottom of stage 2. Now we're seeing Boston begin to trend back up and look pretty good, but and honestly, I'm optimistic that Boston is a top 6 team, but I can't place them there if they only had one win against a top 6 team in stage 2. In fact, Boston are 0-16. That's right. 0 wins, 0 map wins, and 16 map losses in stage 2 against teams in the top 5 for the season. So if I had to place a team at a clear middle of the pack in Overwatch League, it would be the Boston Uprising, and the results pretty consistently show that. Now let's discuss the Stage 2 playoffs. The Fusion are going to take on the London Spitfire, and elephant in the room, the Fusion have yet to take a single map off of the Spitfire so far. They lost 4-0 in the preseason, which, okay, sure, doesn't count, but then they lost 4-0 in Stage 2. Their important result is obviously their loss to London in Stage 2, and that's the one that I'll be drawing a lot of comparisons and contrasts to. The map pool is also changing, so it's going to be Gibraltar, Nepal, Hanamura, Kings Row, and Route 66. So instead of 2 control maps, we now have 2 payload maps, and London has a 100% win rate on Hanamura, Route 66, and Watchpoint Gibraltar. And they've played each of those maps 3 times. Kings Row is London's worst map of the stage, only winning 2 out of 5 times, and then they've got a 75% win rate on Nepal. I have no idea if that went over anyone else's head, but it kind of goes over mine. But the point is that Kings Row is going to be their worst map. The other maps, they have a pretty big win rate advantage over the Philadelphia Fusion, so take that for what it's worth. It's not an ideal map pool for Fusion. Nepal is the Fusion's worst map. They've never won on Village. They're 1-4 on Shrine, 2-4 on Sanctum, and one of their wins on Sanctums and their lone win on Shrine came against the Florida Mayhem. So one of the biggest mismatches is going to be Kings Row. It's one of the Fusion's best and one of London's worst. So as you can tell, I really like looking at numbers, but I don't think it tells us why these teams do well on certain maps, and also misses out on one key factor, EQO. EQO has been pretty stellar in Overwatch League so far, but he missed this entire week where they played London and I believe the Houston Outlaws. So the question is, and he was sick in that. It wasn't a coaching choice. He was not feeling well that week. The question is, assuming EQO plays against London, can he make a big enough difference? That's a pretty big ask. And so I'm going to go ahead and say, sadly, I don't think so. I don't think this will be another 4-0 series. I think he can be enough to make a difference for one or maybe even two of these maps. But I think the Fusion can lock up Kings Row. But it's unlikely they're going to win Nepal. So it really comes down to some unfavorable win rates on Gibraltar and Hanamura. And London has shown that they can really struggle against defensive teams, but they do quite well against aggressive teams. So I think this is a pretty safe 3-1 in favor of London. And of course, I can't wait to be wrong and just, get blasted for that. But if I had to say, based on the information I have, it looks pretty good for London. But there's a few factors that I think would be really important to watch. First, can EQO make a bigger impact than I think? It's really tough to say if EQO is a better match against London or not. As I said earlier, London struggles against other defensive teams. The Houston Outlaws is a great example, but they do quite well against aggressive teams. Look at the Shock and look at the Fusion. Both of those are fairly aggressive teams, and London has done quite well against both of those. Obviously, the Shock are not super high in the rankings right now, so it's not the perfect parallel, but I hope you can take it for what it is. The second thing is can the Fusion deal with Bidoshin? The Philadelphia Fusion have been known to struggle against teams with a strong Zenyatta like Jonak or Bidoshin. They're very different styles of Zenyatta, but Bidoshin was one of the most influential players when London played the Fusion earlier, particularly doing a lot of work to shut down Carpe, and you can guarantee that that's going to be one of London's key to victory, is how to address and deal with Carpe. So what this means is I think it's pretty likely that we're going to see Spitfire versus NYXL rematch for the stage championship. So if they use the same system for the map pool, it means that these teams will play on Route 66, Lijiang Tower, Volskaya Industries, Hollywood, and Watchpoint Gibraltar for a tiebreaker. At this point, we're getting really deep into speculation, and I'm running out of time, but this really has the making of being one of the closest matches we've seen in Overwatch League yet. If I had to hinge the match on one player from each side, it would be Libero for NYXL and Birdring for London. When London and NYXL last met, we saw Pine on 3 maps and Libero on the remaining 2. Each map that Pine played, NYXL lost. It was probably one of his worst series in Overwatch League yet. But what you'll notice is when you look at the maps that they won and the ones that they lost, is that Pine couldn't give Sabiobi the space he needed. Instead, Pine, in an attempt to maybe get more kills or place himself more aggressively, died sooner in fights and allowed London to focus on Sabiobi. And Libero is very different in that. If Libero can play like he has recently, this is one that, even though on paper I'd say slightly favors London, I feel like this is definitely one that could go NYXL's way. On the flip side, Birdring was the key to victory against NYXL earlier. He had a super deep hero pool against NYXL, made it really struggle to adapt. And some of that is maybe because of Pine's restricted hero pool, they weren't able to do so. But if NYXL has any chance of beating London, which they definitely do, it will be by keeping Birdring in his cage. Thank you all for tuning in for another episode of Overwatch League Daily. I believe this is episode 75 or 76 total since November 29th, which I think is absolutely amazing. Thank you guys for sticking with us as we figured out formats and guests and how to best make the show as good as it can be. One thing, if you do like this show, and I really do appreciate it, and you've got a little loose change in your pocket, head over to patreon.com/OWL Daily Show. Supporting the show goes a long way to getting the best footage every day, helping me stay up until 4 a.m. is, I think, what time it is right now. Getting this helps go into the Red Bull Fund and everything else. So thank you guys for supporting by watching, by listening, telling your friends, or supporting on Patreon. If you like, so tomorrow's guest, I almost forgot. Tomorrow's guest, I'm actually going to sit down with Yiska and Volamel. We're going to actually discuss the Stage 2 playoffs. So make sure to tune in for that one. And of course, if you like the show, make sure to subscribe on YouTube, iTunes, your podcast app of choice, so you don't miss future episodes. And you can also watch or listen to the show at winstonslab.com. You can also find links to everything at overwatchleaguedaily.com. And if you have a question or comment for the show, email me at overwatchleaguedaily@gmail.com. Thanks again for tuning in. It's been an awesome Stage 2 with you all. I will be back tomorrow with Yiska and Volamel for another episode of Overwatch League Daily.